Welcome to the Brigham Young University Family History Library webinar series. My name is Braden Knutson. I'll be your host for this webinar today. We'd like to welcome you and thank you for joining us. We have a couple of polls down at the bottom that we would ask you to fill out for us as I go through some of our announcements today. Our next webinar will be on Tuesday, February 21st at 5:30 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. And that webinar will be by Jessica Hicks, and it will be a pretty good one, so I encourage you to join us then. Also, as a reminder, at the end of the month, we will be having a Family Search Family Tree question and answer with Kathryn Grant. So she'll be back for us then. It'll be really good. That will be on February 24th at 4 p.m. So that's a week from tomorrow. So that'll be good. And we have a link to submit questions ahead of time attached to our monthly schedule. And we'd encourage you to fill those questions out in advance. But if you don't get a chance, you can bring them to the webinar itself, and we'll make sure we get all your questions answered. It'll be a really good experience. So today we'll be pleased to hear from Kathryn Grant, who will be giving a presentation titled The Teach Part of Find, Take, Teach, Teaching Others Effectively About Family History. After years on the sidelines, Kathryn started her family history and discovered a new passion. Her specialty is mentoring new family historians and helping them find success and maybe even avoid some of the mistakes she's made. Kathryn teaches family history classes at the BYU Family History Library and Riverton Family Search Library. She has also written a series for the Nauvoo Times on family history. She currently works for the LDS Church as a technical writer and business analyst. When she's not doing family history, she also enjoys good books, uplifting music, and fresh raspberries. So we will turn the time over to Kathryn now and remind everyone that we have a insights and comments box up here in the right upper corner and questions box in the bottom right corner. So we will turn the time over to Kathryn now.
Great. Thank you, everybody. It's so good to have you with us today. I really appreciate you coming to our webinar. And I wanted to tell you a little bit how this webinar came about. I was doing a Find, Take, Teach experience with one of my ward members, and she wanted me to just kind of give her Family History 101, or rather Family Search 101. She wanted to learn how to navigate and so forth. And so I sat her down at the computer and I sat by her side and just kind of talked her through as she clicked on the summary card and looked at the person page and different things like that. And she picked it up really quickly. What was interesting, though, was what she said at the end of our time together. She said that she had had another family member try to teach her the same thing that we had done that evening, but that it hadn't worked out at all well. And apparently this other family member, according to my friend, was a quote-unquote expert. And she said that this expert had just raced through everything so quickly that my friend didn't really have a chance to absorb it or take it in. And then she made this interesting comment. She said she just wasn't a good teacher. And that was an epiphany to me, because so often we I think in Find, Take, Teach, we probably don't put enough emphasis on the importance of teaching effectively. And so I thought about that, and the idea for this webinar was born. And so let's go ahead and look at what we're going to be talking about today. First of all, we'll do a quick review of the Find, Take, Teach process just to be sure that we're all on the same page with that. And then I want to share with you 7 tips for effective teaching in the Find, Take, Teach process. And there's nothing, magical or anything about these tips, and there's probably a great many others that other people could share. These are just 7 that I've found especially helpful as I've been doing Find, Take, Teach with people in my ward and elsewhere. So let's take a look at the Find, Take, Teach process. The first step is finding, and of course in that process we find a deceased family member who needs temple work. Then we take that name to the temple, we perform ordinances for that person, and then we teach others to do the same. Now, implicit in this process is the fact that in order for us to have been able to find, someone would have needed to teach us. And then also implicit in the last step is that if we're teaching someone else, then we want to teach them effectively so that they can teach others, who in turn can teach others. That's the thing I love about the Find, Take, Teach approach is it's a cycle, and it has the potential to absolutely revolutionize family history in the church. And so I'm just thrilled that we can spend this time together and talk about how to be more effective teachers in this process. So 7 tips for effective teaching in a find, take, teach scenario. First of all, I wanted to put something out there as a kind of a backdrop. Some of you might recognize this quote from Elder Hale's recent conference talk in the October conference of 2016. In this talk, he was actually addressing parents and grandparents who have the responsibility for teaching their family. But as I read his quote, I thought this so applies to us as teaching family history. And of course, family history is all about families, so it applies in that sense too. But I love what he said here. He said, we should not worry that we are not professionally trained gospel teachers. And I would add that we shouldn't worry that we're not professionally trained genealogists or professionally certified educators or anything like that. He goes on to say, no training class or manual is as helpful as personally studying our scriptures, praying, pondering, and seeking the guidance of the Spirit. So I want that to be our backdrop for the things that we talk about today. You don't have to be a professional to be an excellent teacher, and you don't have to worry if you're not an expert or not a professional. Anybody can be an effective teacher by following the guidance of the Spirit and following this counsel that Elder Hales gave us. So with that as a backdrop, let's move into the 7 tips. The first one is be real. Next, prepare. Focus on the student. Teach by the Spirit. Welcome questions. Teach fishing with training wheels when needed, and that mixed metaphor is intentional. I hope it makes it maybe a little bit more memorable, a little touch of humor there. And then finally, be intentional about improving our teaching skills. So the first one, be real. I was trying to think of a good way to capture what I was getting at here. And what I'm kind of trying to drive at is being authentic. You've probably all had teachers that you thought were both effective and maybe not so effective. And if you think about what makes teachers effective, I really think a big part of it is this authenticity, or just that they're real people to us. They're not on some, not off in some ivory tower or something, but they're relatable. And I think there's 3 things that make a person relatable. The first one is a spirit of humility. And as I thought about this, we sometimes experts, those who are experts, can have maybe a little problem with this because we're excited about our knowledge and we maybe take a little bit of pride in it. I've also noticed, though, that there can be an opposite problem of it really is kind of pride for us when we maybe don't feel like an expert, because then we might get defensive, or we're afraid to be real with people because we don't want to be exposed or we don't want to be vulnerable. And no matter whether we're the expert or whether we're the non-expert or any place in between, humility is always appropriate. And I love, whenever I think of humility, I think of dear Elder Worthland. And after he passed away, you remember Elder Worthland's funeral was held, I think, in around 2008. His son said something very interesting, and this was published in the Ensign. When Elder Worthland was set apart, President Monson set him apart and told him that his humility would endear him to the members of the church. And if you think back to Elder Worthland's talks, you remember that he was humble, he was relatable, he was funny at times, even told humorous experiences at his own expense. He had no ego whatsoever. But because of that, people could relate to him, they learned from him. And I just think that he's such a good example of how to be humble in teaching other people. So that's a key aspect of being an effective teacher, especially in a find, take, teach situation, because so many people, when they're starting out with family history, are nervous about it or unconfident of their ability. So to be a humble person in that situation makes it so much easier for them to learn. And right along with that is the importance of being empathetic. I remember when I first started doing family history, I had taken a 5-day class at the Family History Training Center. It was wonderful. I learned so much from it. I felt that I understood the concepts. I had a strong testimony. I'd just been called as a consultant, so I went to my ward in California, got my first assignment, sat down at the computer, and I panicked. I totally did not know what to do. All the concepts that I had learned were all well and good, but I didn't yet have the skill and the experience to know how to apply them. And you know what? I hope that I never forget that feeling of my first sense of panic and not knowing what to do, because so many people, when they start out, are in exactly that same boat. And so if we can remember back to our experiences when we first started and be empathetic with those people that we're helping, that will go a long way towards having an effective teaching experience. The last one is to be loving. You probably remember that Steve Covey was fond of saying, "No one cares how much you know until they know how much you care." And there's something about people can tell, right? I mean, when someone has a loving attitude towards you, it feels so different than when they don't. And so, if we have that loving attitude in our heart when we're teaching people, we're going to be so much more effective in a find, take, teach situation, and indeed in any situation. So be real, be humble, be empathetic, and be loving as you teach people about family history, and that'll go a long way towards helping them. The next one is to prepare. And I've divided this into two types of preparation. The first type is spiritual, and the second type we might call more logistical, or maybe the practical sorts of things that you do to prepare for a find, take, teach experience. Now, the first thing that I wanted to note here, which won't probably surprise you at all, total Sunday school answer. But the reason we always give Sunday school answers is because they work, because they really are true. So a fantastic way to prepare spiritually for find, take, teach is to consistently do the basics, have meaningful daily prayer and scripture study. Also, there's nothing like doing your own family history regularly to help prepare. One thing I've noticed about that, as probably you have, is that family history is a work of miracles. And as you experience those miracles, or as you overcome challenges, you kind of fill your reservoir as a teacher so that you can share those things as prompted by the Spirit when you're having a find, take, teach experience. And then finally, worship regularly in the temple. The apostles and prophets have testified to us of the power that comes into our lives as we regularly worship in the temple. And as we do that, brothers and sisters, I share my testimony with you that we become more effective teachers. We have more of the guidance of the Spirit. Our testimony of family history increases. All of these things will help us prepare spiritually, and especially, I think, going to the temple. Well, I don't know if I can call that one out. I think they all do, but I do think that worshiping the temple is a very, very important part of preparing spiritually to do find, take, teach. And then there's the more logistical part, or the more practical part. Although, as the Doctrine and Covenant says, there isn't really anything that's just temporal, right? Everything has its spiritual aspect. So it's important to learn the person's goals. A lot of times we might make assumptions. Going back to the experience I had with my ward member that I talked about in the beginning, I might have assumed that she wanted to get temple names right away, but she actually didn't. She specifically asked if we could learn how to use the website. She wanted to be prepared in that way before she started gathering temple names. So if I had gone in and just assumed that, I had a goal and just assumed it was the same as hers, you can imagine that that might have been very frustrating for both of us, and she might not have wanted to meet with me again if I had tried to impose my goal on her instead of finding out her goals. So how do we find a person's goals? I don't know of any other way than to ask them, since probably none of us are mind readers, right? So just ask the person, and a lot of the times they will have a goal. They'll say, yeah, my ancestors have been bugging me from the other side. I really need to work on my mom's line or whatever. But sometimes I've found that the person is new enough to family history, or maybe they've just been feeling the prompting to start, but they haven't thought about specific goals. In that case, what I find is effective is to invite them to make some goals and maybe suggest a few that they might be interested in. You could ask if they're working on a full tree or an empty tree. And based on that, you could recommend some goals if they don't have any. And invite them to prayerfully set some goals. I would never dictate a goal to a person, even if they don't know a goal yet, because that would be to rob them of the experience of setting that goal by the Spirit. So encourage them to set a goal if they don't have one, and encourage them to get back with you so that you know that goal ahead of time so that you can prepare. And that kind of leads us to the next step. If the goal has anything to do with finding names or attaching sources or anything like that, review their tree ahead of time. Family Search has come out with an amazing consultant planner that allows you to prepare lesson plans, see the person's tree. It's just a phenomenal tool. And this link here will take you to it. As I understand it, these links are live when the webinar is published on YouTube and on the website. So you should be able to click on this. But for any reason, if you either don't want to wait until the webinar is published, although they're usually published really quickly, my email will be available at the end of the presentation, and you're very welcome to email me and I will send you the link to the consultant planner. Finally, prayerfully prepare a lesson plan, and there's a link here to the blank lesson plan form, and it looks like this. So if you go to the consultant planner, this form is available there, and it couldn't be easier. You can fill it out online, or you can also print it and fill it out, whatever works better for you. I have found that if I take the time to prepare, I don't always follow what I prepare, but it seems like I can get better inspiration if I have to diverge if I've prepared. Does that make sense? So sometimes people will say, well, I don't want to prepare, I don't want to over prepare, I don't want to be tied, to my lesson. And I'm not saying that you should prepare a lesson plan and then don't dare change from it no matter what. But rather, what I've found when I prepare ahead of time is that I give the Spirit an opportunity to work with me and to help me find things that I probably wouldn't have found otherwise. So I would say prepare ahead of time, and it doesn't have to be elaborate. It can be, maybe 3 steps or something. The more important part about preparation is being guided by the Spirit and preparing to help meet that person's goals. And then also not to be so stuck on the lesson plan that you're not able to go a different direction if the Spirit says to do that, or if the person requests. You get there and they say, I know I said I wanted to do this, but since we talked, I've had this other idea. So we want to be flexible in that regard. So be prepared, but be flexible and able to change if need be. Third one, focus on the student. Now, what we've been talking about already has kind of been focusing on the student. That's really an overall theme. But I wanted to take this opportunity to focus on 3 specific ways that we can focus on the student. The first one is to be respectful of their time. Now, I've heard some people recommend that we should not do a find, take, teach longer than 30 minutes. However, what I've found as I've been working with people is that some of them, in fact, I would say about 98% of them, want to go longer than 30 minutes. They prefer about an hour. That's usually my average time with a person. But the way to find out is to ask them. So the bottom line here isn't to recommend to you that it has to be 30 minutes or it has to be an hour or whatever, but it is to be sensitive to the person and take the amount of time that they want to take. So if you insisted on leaving after 30 minutes and the person wasn't done, that would be frustrating. But also, if they asked it to be an hour and you stayed for 2.5, that's also frustrating to the student and imposes on them. So I found, again, it's just so easy to ask the person. We're not mind readers. So I just say to the person, what are you expecting? What kind of time are you expecting to spend on this? Half hour, hour? And most of the time they'll tell me an hour, and that turns out to be a pretty good length of time in most cases. But the bottom line is to ask. Next one is to be sensitive to their level. It's uncomfortable to be condescended to, and it's also uncomfortable to have one talking way over your head and to have no idea what they're referring to. So be sensitive to the level that your person is at. If you feel comfortable asking them, you can ask them that, although sometimes people might be a little bit embarrassed because they, well, now I have to admit that I don't know anything. So be very sensitive to that, but usually a lot of times you can tell by things they say, or you can tell by questions they ask. So be sure that you're adapting your teaching to the level of the person, not too high and not too low, but just right. And we'll be talking later about the spirit, and in my experience, the spirit is the very best way to be in tune with what that person needs, what level of teaching that person needs. And then finally, we're all about turning hearts, right? So make that a focus of your teaching, is to give that person, or provide an opportunity, I should say, for that person to have a heart-turning experience. It's really the Holy Ghost that turns hearts, and also I think the influence of our ancestors from the other side. But we want to do everything we can to enable that as a teacher. So as you're preparing your lesson, as you're there with the person sitting next to them doing find, take, teach, keep in mind the importance of providing or enabling a heart-turning experience. I had an interesting experience in my stake. A few years back, we had a big push on having the youth find temple names. But it was such, and this is not a criticism, because we do the best we can, right? But in this particular situation, the youth weren't really taught in a way that turned their hearts. They did find some names, they found a lot of names and did the work, but afterwards, the momentum was lost. And in my stake calling, I have access to the statistics of name submission. And after that initial push, and everybody, got so excited, but hearts maybe weren't really turned, the numbers just dropped right back down to where they were before. So we didn't have consistent action. Turning hearts changes that. If people's hearts are truly turned to their ancestors and to family history, they tend to be consistent and regular in doing family history. And that's a blessing not only to them, but to their families on this side of the veil and the other side of the veil. So we want to enable a heart-turning experience so that they're truly converted to family history. Remember, it's about the student, it's not about the teacher. So, teaching by the Spirit. What I'd like to do now is invite you to answer this question: how do you teach by the Spirit? Maybe think back to your Find, Take, Teach experiences, or to any experience teaching in primary or Relief Society, priesthood, whatever. And while I'm giving you an opportunity to think about that, I want to tell a little experience that I heard Diane Loosely relate at one of the Riverton seminars. Oh, and did I say go ahead and enter that in the chat box? And then after you've entered that, after I've told this little story, we'll share anything with everybody anything that you've submitted. So Diane was giving, I believe it was the keynote at one of the Riverton seminars, and she told him an experience. She's right now a senior vice president at Family Search, and she's also an accomplished genealogist, and she's worked at the Salt Lake Library. So one day she was at the library, and a patron came in looking for help. Well, Diane, being the eager to help and with her expertise, gave this patron a number of suggestions that, according to her knowledge, were really good suggestions and should have resulted in success. So she sent the patron off to the stacks to follow her good advice. And the patron came back a couple of hours later, not having experienced success. Well, at the time, Diane related that she was helping another patron, and so she wasn't able to revisit with this patron what she had told them. And another missionary stepped in to help. So that missionary helped, gave the patrons some more ideas, sent them back to the stacks to try again. Well, about 20 minutes later, the patron came back and was so excited because they had found what they were looking for. And so afterwards, Diane asked the other missionary, said, "What did you tell them?" She said, "I told them everything I could think of that would be helpful and useful to them with the particular problem they related." And the missionary admitted to her, he said, "I actually didn't have a clue what to tell them. I did not know, so I just went by the Spirit." And when Diane told this, she actually got a little emotional, like I'm doing right now, because that just had such an impact on her that she had done what the world would say, or even what a professional genealogist would say was the right thing to do. She shared her knowledge, gave the patrons some really great ideas of what to do, but in this case, they weren't successful. What was successful was this other humble missionary who admitted that he didn't have a clue how to advise the patron, and so he relied on the Spirit, and that was what gave the patron the answer that he needed. So let's take a look then I'm going to bring up the chat window and see what suggestions. So we have Kent Miller said, use the scriptures. Absolutely. That is fantastic. Sharon says, do all you can to prepare, then be prepared to listen to the Spirit. And as you present, be humble to the promptings, which may be different than what you had thought you would share. Kent and Sharon, thank you. That's absolutely right. I could not agree with that more. So we've got somebody else typing, so I'll hang on for just a second and wait for that response, or more than a second actually, no rush really. Okay, so Colleen says, or Colleen, I hope I'm saying your name right. Pray, read, think, process, and listen. Yeah, listening is so important, and I love that you put repeat at the end, kind of lather, rinse, repeat, right? That is such a good process, and I find that as you do things like that, that what you learn in that process gives you something to go on for the next time you repeat. So thank you so much, everybody, for those great comments. And Braden, if anything else comes in, will you flag me and we'll mention that. I'm going to close the chat window on my screen right now, and we'll go ahead with the rest of the webinar. So thank you for those great suggestions on teaching by the Spirit. The next thing that I wanted to emphasize is the importance of welcoming questions. I remember sitting in a family history class one time where a brother, a very accomplished brother, was teaching, and somebody raised a question, and his response to them was rather harshly. I'm not sure how else to describe it. He said something along the lines of, "As I already said," and it was just about that harsh. And you can imagine what that did to the person asking the question, and also what it did to the rest of us. We thought, wow, this is not a safe environment. This is not a place where we can feel free to ask our questions. So I would encourage all of us, never do anything to make somebody feel like their question was stupid. Nobody wants to feel stupid. Nobody wants to feel that they're looked down on. Nobody wants to feel that their teaching environment is not safe. And so always welcome questions. And there's a number of ways that you can do that. One that I've found is simply to express gratitude. What I found in my teaching, especially in a classroom situation, is that if one person has the question, there is a really, really good chance that probably at least half of the other students have that same question. There isn't any such thing as a dumb question. So thank the students for the questions. Let them know that you appreciate them asking, and then do your best to answer the question. Now, you're not always going to be able to answer the question, and there's nothing wrong with that. I remember at work one day listening to a coworker trying to explain a website to another coworker, and she got to a place where it was clear, both to my coworker and me, although we didn't, want to embarrass her, but that she didn't really know what she was talking about, but she kept bluffing. And for me, sometimes people will do that because they don't want to be embarrassed by not knowing the answer, and that's totally understandable. But don't you find that you trust somebody more if they're willing to admit that they don't know? Because then when they tell me they do know, I feel that I can trust that. And when they tell me they don't know, I feel I can trust that and that they will find the answer for me. And that leads us to the next part is just candidly admit when you don't know, and don't do it in a sense of embarrassment or anything. You don't have to know everything. We're always learning. You're always going to be learning something, and we're not always going to know the answer to the question that our Find, Take, Teach people ask us. So admit it when we don't know, and don't feel any shame about that. There's no shame in not knowing, and offer to find the answer, and then for sure follow through. If you offer to find the answer, get their contact information, or if they're, in your ward and you know it, then do contact them and let them know what answer you found out. I've heard it said that it's not so important that you know the answer as that you have the ability to find answers, because somebody knows the answer to that question. If it's not you or me, somebody does know that answer, and we just have to find that person. So welcome questions. Never make a person feel stupid for a question, and do your best to answer and admit when you don't know and then find the answer. So now we're to step number 6, or tip number 6, teach fishing. So why do I say that? Probably when I said that, the first thing that came to your mind was the wonderful saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, but teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. So what we want to focus on in our Find, Take, Teach is helping people become self-sufficient. I had a friend I was doing a Find, Take, Teach with, and she mentioned that she had actually gone to a family history center, which I won't name, but at that center, she had asked for help from one of the people there, and the person had basically made my friend sit off to the side, and they had sat down at the computer and they had just clicked here, clicked there, upload, download, da 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 da. When my friend got through with that session, she said to me, she goes, I had no clue what they were doing. I could not follow what they were doing, and I certainly couldn't do it again when I got home. So that's the kind of teaching we don't want to do. And so for that reason, I like to use this kind of analogy, I guess you would say, of letting the person drive. Resist the temptation to sit down at the computer and do it yourself. Always have the person sit at the computer and have them do whatever you're describing rather than you doing it. Now, I find often when I go to a person's house, well, I'd say probably maybe 50% of the house, 50% of the time, when I go to do a Find, Take, Teach experience, the person will set up a chair in front of their computer and they will motion me to sit in the chair. And I always decline, because if you're like me, I do not learn as well watching somebody as I do doing it myself. So even if the person wants you to sit in the driver's seat, don't. Let them drive, and do it in a really encouraging way. I will usually say something like, oh, thank you so much, but you know what? I think it would probably be better for you to sit there and for me to sit on the side and just kind of, do the guidance, because if you're like me, I learn a lot better if I do it myself. And then usually when I say that, people will say, yeah, that's true, I do. A lot of times the reason they don't want to sit at the driver's chair is because they may have had a bad experience in the past where someone has either let them sit there and then has grabbed the mouse away or something like that, or someone's made them feel stupid. And so they're just like, okay, I'm not even going to go there again. I'm going to sit off to the side. But if you have a loving, supportive attitude towards that person and you resist taking control, but just gently, caringly talk them through the learning experience, it will be a very positive experience for them. I've never had that turn out badly. So let the person drive and you be the guide, the loving guide. Really, in a sense, we're a conduit for the Spirit as we do that. So the Spirit doesn't force us. We know that. The Spirit just gently and lovingly offers guidance. So that's what we should do as a person doing a Find, Take, Teach experience. Encourage and express confidence. People will sometimes say, oh, like for instance, I remember a friend had asked me if I would help her learn to attach sources. And so we sat down at the computer and I talked her through doing it. And she had said before, I don't know why, but this just terrifies me. And after we got done, I had encouraged her and just said, yeah, I totally know where you're coming from, but I think you're going to love how easy this is. And so we talked through it. And at the end, she looked at me with almost this dumbfounded look on her face. And she said, that's it? It's that easy? And so she was so surprised. Her expectations had been that it would be this very difficult, horrible thing. And when we talked through it and she did it herself, she realized how easy it was. So I would say never tell a person that something, oh yeah, I can understand why you don't want to attach sources because it's a bear. You're going to hate this. No, no, no. Never say anything like that. Just encourage them, express confidence that they're going to be able to do it. And I've never had somebody not be able to do it. So with that kind of guidance, anybody can succeed. So what did I mean by use training wheels when needed? As much as we do want to encourage people, there are times when they do need the support. So we don't want to swing the pendulum too far to the other side where they're asking for our help and we say, no, 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 you do it yourself. When they need that support, we can provide it for them. And also, this is especially relevant if we're doing a Find, Take, Teach experience and the person has maybe said, all I've got is 30 minutes and I really want to clear a temple name by the end of that 30 minutes. As you know, it's very difficult to clear a valid name in 30 minutes without some kind of preparation beforehand. So when I have that kind of a scenario, I'll run the searches beforehand so that I'm sure of the search terms and sure that we're not going to be hitting our heads against a brick wall. Then I can come to the Find, Take, Teach experience and guide the person relatively quickly through finding the information they need to find to document that name and to clear it for temple work. So provide the training wheels when needed, but always have your end goal to be to teach them to fish, to help them be self-sufficient in finding names for the temple. Finally, be intentional about improving. One thing I found that is so helpful to me in improving my own teaching is to write about my teaching experience afterward. So I will come home, and I usually do this in my journal, but you could do it, on a piece of paper or whatever. But I write about the experience, I write what has happened, and I find that as I write, it provides a way for the Spirit to bring me more insights. And I don't know why that is. All I know is that it's true. And I found that sometimes as I'm writing, the Spirit will confirm something to me in the very act of writing it. And I'll also find that as I'm writing, I'll focus in on things that maybe I hadn't noticed before. And the Spirit will teach me how I could do better in the future. So writing about, and this is just for your eyes, this is not something that you would share with anyone else unless you wanted to. But so don't feel like it has to be, grammatically correct and everything. Just write down the feelings of your heart. Let the Spirit speak to you through your writing, and let your writing show you how you might be able to improve in the future. Ask for feedback from students. Many classes will hand out a kind of evaluation form at the end. I don't know that we want to be that formal with people when we're doing Find, Take, Teach, but we can, without putting people on the spot, just maybe ask them, hey, do you have any, I'm trying to improve my teaching. I've actually done that with people, say, I'm trying to be a more effective teacher. Do you have any suggestions for me? And if they do, then welcome those suggestions and, never argue about them, never become defensive. But asking for feedback can really be helpful because we all have blind spots. And someone else may very easily see a way that we could improve that we would not see in 100 years. Learn from good examples. I have learned both from actually from good and bad examples. So you can look at people that are teaching in any situation and just think, okay, what was good about that? What taught me? What reached me? What helped me become a better person through the teaching? What are some of the things that they did? One thing I would recommend here is to consider that one of the best examples of teaching is the temple ceremony. Now, I know we want to be careful about what we talk about outside the temple, but I want to point out two things that you will notice in the temple that provide an example of good teaching. One is repetition. Very few of us learn things just on one exposure to it. Most of us need multiple exposures. And the temple is a wonderful example of meaningful repetition, especially as we go regularly. And I don't know about you, but I am continually learning from the temple. Same thing from the scriptures, actually. Have you ever read a verse for the 100th time and come away still with a fresh insight? So repetition is a wonderful tool because every time we come back to something, we're a different person. We bring something else to that learning experience. So repetition is something that the temple is a great example of. Another is the power of stories. Stories are powerful in that they engage us much better a lot of the time than just citing a list of principles. A good family history story will allow people to hear the spirit, and this is one reason why it's so important for us as helpers to do our own family history, because as we do, we're going to have experiences, we're going to discover family stories that we can share, and then those stories will engage the people that we're working with. So those are just two examples of learning from the temple how to be a good teacher. As you go to the temple in the future, ask Heavenly Father to show you how you can become a better teacher by seeing how teaching is done in the temple. A wonderful resource that we've been given in the fairly recent past is the Teaching in the Savior's Way booklet. I can't say enough good about that. The Savior, of course, is our exemplar as we're trying to be effective teachers. So studying this booklet is one of the best ways that you can focus on how the Savior is an excellent, effective teacher and how we can be more like him. And to go along with that, if you're a consultant in your ward or if you have any other teaching calling, ask if you can attend the monthly, well, if you have a teaching calling, you're probably already attending. But in a lot of wards, the consultants don't automatically think of going. But when I heard Mike Sandberg of Family Search present his Find, Take, Teach training, he strongly encouraged us as consultants to go to the monthly teacher council because we are teachers. We're constantly teaching others to do family history. So check with your Sunday school president or other person in charge of Sunday school and just ask for permission to attend that monthly meeting. I have found it to be just incredibly helpful, especially because it's a council and we share thoughts and ideas with each other. We ask each other questions, we raise concerns, and we're all able to teach each other and to share insights and so forth. So that's another great resource. So everybody, that concludes our webinar. Let's just look again as a summary over the tips that we talked about. Be real, prepare ahead of time, focus on the student, teach by the Spirit, welcome questions, teach fishing, teach a person to fish and use the training wheels when you need to, and then also be intentional about improving. Finally, this is a wonderful quote that I love from Mike Sandberg of Family Search. He said, as part of the Find, Take, Teach process, family history helpers, that's you and me, seek to create heart-turning experiences for the people they help. These experiences help others love family history and ultimately become saviors on Mount Zion. So that concludes our webinar, and thank you so much for your time and attention today. Here's the slide with my email address if you need to contact me. And Braden, do we have any questions that we need to address? Okay, then thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining us today. We hope you've really been able to enjoy this quick webinar. If you didn't get a chance to answer our polls at the beginning of the webinar, we would ask you to do so now. We also have a feedback pod down here, and if you wouldn't mind giving us some feedback on how we can improve our webinars, that would be great. Those answers are confidential, just so that you are aware. And if you do have any questions, feel free to write those in. As a reminder, these webinars are being recorded, and you can go to our website here and find the link to the recording there, or you can go straight to our YouTube channel and you can find the video there, and along with many of our other videos as well. Again, we thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you next time.